Okay, so let's start our second part of this chapter, which talks about the modes of participation in sport. And so starting off, anytime we enter a new market, new international market, we have to be very aware of the situation that we're moving into. As a good example, going back to the first chapter, we talked about the NFL and what it did in Europe. Many times it did not take into account cultural differences, assumed that the American way of marketing to consumers was the way that it should be done across the globe, and we found that that wasn't a good approach. Most important thing is understanding cultural differences and recognizing those and having respect for them. Not having the my way is the highway perspective. And so modes of participation is defined as ways that we're going to be involved in new international markets. And so when we talk about modes of participation, there are basically 5 different modes that I want to talk about quickly here in this video. The first one is export and import of trade, foreign direct investment, licensing. We'll also talk about franchising and management contracts. So we'll start first with importing and exporting. The basic definition of importing and exporting is listed here. It's in your book as well. But exporting would be basically products or services that are being sent out of country A and are being received as an import by country B. So a company produces something, let's say the United States, and then sends that product to another country. They are exporting it out of the United States, and the other country that it's going to would receive it as an import. And so the import is any foreign-made product or service that are being purchased by a domestic consumer, in other words, by a consumer within that country. So if a product is produced in the United States, it is then exported out to Canada, which then considers it an import. And so if we look at a basic understanding of this import-export model, we'll take Puma as an example. Puma is a German company that produces products all over the globe. It produces the products, so for example, in China, Turkey, El Salvador, and Indonesia. They then ship or export out of those countries into the United States. The United States, the retailers themselves, we'll say is the United States, imports them. And so the product is produced in China, we'll say, is imported into the United States. And then they then produce the revenue for Puma, which then sends the money back to Germany. And so you could go from the headquarters where it's designed to where it's produced is then exported globally, maybe into the United States as an import. The retailers sell it, and then the money goes back to Puma. And you've got a cyclical relationship when we're talking about importing and exporting. And so understanding importing and exporting many times in sport industry is that it's service oriented. And so services such as sport tourism, so that would be any type of event that's planned for a group of people. And so somebody wanted to go on a Tour de France ride, not during the Tour de France. Companies may operate and bring in people from outside to lead these tours. Others could be sporting venue tours, so looking at spring training for Major League Baseball, or any other types of events. So tourism is an example. And then sporting events. And your assignment for this part of Chapter 2 is a discussion assignment. And I put the link to the video that I want you to watch. It's also a article that you could read as well about sporting events in Qatar, specifically the construction industry in Qatar, talking about importing and exporting services, that is labor for the construction of facilities. But sporting events such as the NFL in London, Notre Dame going to Ireland, the Olympic Games, the World Cup, so on and so forth. And then we also have international athlete brand management, so athletes that are operating globally. So those are all examples of export and import. The second mode of participation I want to discuss is foreign direct investment. Foreign direct investment is defined as a strategy of investing capital. Sorry about that. Sorry about that. All right. Foreign direct investment is a strategy of investing. See if I can stop this. Hold on. Sorry. Really sorry about that. I didn't answer it. I just wouldn't stop ringing. Foreign direct investment is a strategy of investing capital into a foreign company that results in the rights of ownership or control over production and operations. And so there's really 2 different types of foreign direct investment. One of them is a joint venture, and this is essentially where you're taking two separate parties that may be in different countries and forming a company together. And so, for example, in sports, you would see ESPN and Star Sports. Obviously, ESPN is a company that is formed out of the United States, and they have a partnership with the News Corporation, which is known as Star TV. They are based out of Singapore. They operate 25 different ESPN and Star Sports brands, branded television networks in Asia. And so it's an example of an American company, that is ESPN, and Star Television, working together as a joint venture to operate in multiple different countries. And so you really have a hodgepodge of different cultures that you have to understand, as well as from a marketing perspective, a group of different types of consumers in different markets. The second type of foreign direct investment is a foreign subsidiary. And foreign subsidiaries are basically companies whose headquarters are in another country, but they trade domestically. And so, for example, Wilson Sporting Goods is an example of a sport foreign subsidiary. Wilson Sporting Goods is a subsidiary of a Finnish group called Amber Sports. And so while the headquarters is in Finland, Wilson Sports would be an example of a foreign subsidiary in the United States. All right, the third type of mode of production, and I'll go through this relatively quickly, is licensing. Licensing is a type of promotional activity. It's a contract whereby a licensor, so somebody who has a right to a brand, allows a licensee, somebody who produces a product, to utilize the rights of various marks or trademarks, that would be logos or slogans, to produce some sort of product in exchange for a fee, either monetary or in kind. In other words, the NFL would be a licensor, and any type of manufacturer that produced a jersey, a hat, a t-shirt would then pay, they would be the licensee, they would pay a fee to the NFL to have the right to produce and make money off of the NFL brand. Okay, this requires typically an upfront cost of the licensee and then a percentage of the fee as they sell. And that's typically anywhere from 6 to almost 15% depending on the company. Really, one of the biggest job markets for a lot of international sport organizations is the control of a licensing product. In other words, allowing the World Cup or the World Cup allowing different companies to produce goods all over the country, or all over the world, produces a lot of different job opportunities. So if you're looking at working in international sports, want to travel the globe and work for a sport organization, look into licensing jobs and companies that operate licensing. So let's go through relatively quickly what licensing is. All of these images on the screen you'll see are licenses. It's the art of marketing names, logos, or marks. The first thing you have to do is be able to protect it. And typically in the United States, the way that you do that is to register that with the U.S. government. If you operate internationally, there are international pacts that allow you to license your logo with those companies, with those countries. Some of the pros and cons of licensing. Obviously, some of the pros is that you increase your revenue while limiting your risks. And so in other words, you don't have to worry about selling 1,000 t-shirts. All you have to worry about is allowing them to produce the t-shirts. And so you get extra revenue by producing those shirts, but limit the risk of it. It's a low cost, so really you're allowing somebody else to market your brand. You are able to enhance your image by co-branding your licensed product with materials, so such as a licensed couch, as an example, allowing you to enter into new markets. You have trademark protection, so legal protection if somebody tries to take advantage of the trademark restrictions, and that allows you to co-brand. Some of the cons or disadvantages would be lack of manufacturing control. While you give somebody the rights to produce a t-shirt, the quality of that t-shirt is sometimes not great. You may have negative images associated with poor products or products that get recalled. You may have too many unrelated products in the market. You have poor timing and when the product comes out, inappropriate distribution, or mismatching with other brands. These are all potential disadvantages. So typically how it works is a company will develop a licensing program, has to go through basically 3 steps. They have to first start with conducting a trademark search to make sure there's no other trademarks out there. They then devise a process to screen those manufacturers or those licensees, the people who are going to pay them for the right of their to use their logo. And then devising a process to police the marketplace to ensure that the trademark is actually, and the contracts that you have with licensees are upheld and are valid and have value. And typically, large organizations such as the IOC spend a lot of time and effort trying to work with different countries to police the marketplace. Okay, so how does this work? Like I said before, it's typically an upfront licensing fee. Then you pay a royalty fee per product that's sold, generally 6 to 10%, and some I've seen upwards of 15% are based on the gross sales of the wholesale cost of the product. And it gives you the ability, again, to enter new markets, boost sales, and improve your image. So some of the revenues from licensing are a big part of different organizations. Looking at the International Olympic Committee, there are 4 basic revenue sources, and this is pretty much for any sport organization, but the IOC is a good example. The 2 largest for the IOC are broadcasting revenue as well as sponsorship revenue. We'll talk about that later in the semester. But licensing is the 3rd one, and as well as ticket sales. And so it's a way for them to be able to produce additional revenue for an organization. You can see some of the factors that influence purchasing. A lot of it has to do with winning. The more you win, the easier it is to sell tickets, but also the easier it is to sell manufactured goods and obviously bring in more revenue. Looking from an international perspective, most of the major leagues and international organizations control the marks of their respective members. So the NBA has control over all NBA logos and works with the U.S. government to try to control the marketplace. And so typically it may be a little bit more difficult to police the marketplace for international counterfeiters because it's a wider range of regulations in different countries, as well as a wider geographical range. So licensing products, there are 3 basic areas in where we've seen and will likely continue to see growth in licensed merchandise. Kids wear is one internationally, obviously because of this class. It's something that's important to us and why we talk about it as a mode of production. New leagues, and so example where we saw this was in NASCAR and action sports. You might say CrossFit or other types of products are similar in that. Licensing, and so talking about licensing internationally, some of the domestic markets for domestic logo merchandise has plateaued, and so we're starting to see the expansion of different leagues trying to market their products globally. For example, Major League Baseball has spent a significant amount of efforts in Latin America, Europe, and Australia, trying to build relationships with those countries, which hopefully would then result in sport tourism to their events, as well as some of the promotions that go along with it. Looking at the NBA, their greatest focus has been on television exposure, developing grassroots programs globally, and as well as having individual exhibition games globally, which hopefully has been able to drive a lot of their international market for licensed goods. The NFL has done a lot of things. Obviously, we had them as a case study. We've tried to do some things they have tried to do some things with their jerseys globally, make them more look like soccer jerseys, because many of the markets in Europe, for example, where NFL is more popular, has more fashion concerns than others. And so some of the biggest problems associated with international licensing efforts is it's hard to take a global approach because you have so many different cultures out there. Fashion is a big part of licensing, especially with manufactured goods such as shirts, t-shirts, hats, jerseys, those types of things. And many times it's hard to find the right licensing partner, which then leads to some quality control issues. So those are all issues for licensing. The 4th of the modes of production or participation, are franchising, which is essentially the transaction in which the owner of a protected trademark grants another person for some consideration the right to operate under this trademark for the purpose of producing or distributing the product or service. And so typically what we're talking about here is the ability, example of franchising would be where you see most often fast food organizations or industries. A company allows you to open up a fast food restaurant, and that is called a franchise, or any of those types of things. The biggest problem by allowing somebody to take over your brand is control of the brand image. And the biggest problem with this is the same problem that we've seen in other industries, is oftentimes you start to see misuse of the brand image, which then overall across the globe would cause problems with your consumers' image of your brand. And the last thing I want to talk about is management contracts, and these are typically biggest issue with these is control. Essentially, you're requiring an organization to essentially hire another enterprise to run its own operations in return for some compensation. In other words, I'm outsourcing the management of my brand. It's seen somewhat rare in certain circumstances. It's applicable, but it again is almost complete control of management takeover. Again, you lose all of that control. So those are the modes of participation in sport.